All right, well, it's time for the video for this week. And as usual, I like to give titles that are a little bit more specific to, I think, what is being said in the passage. Our faith is just a very generic, general type of thing. And really the emphasis of this passage continues to be living for God amidst suffering. And so what I'd like the title to be, you don't have to use it, but I'm titling this Living Victoriously Behind Enemy Territory, because we live in enemy territory. We live in Satan's realm. And this passage is specifically really emphasizing that with some of the things that it says about our past, verse 3, etc. But this is a difficult passage. Peter's not an easy book. He's got some really interesting ways of communicating. But on the first page of the second paragraph in the curriculum, I like the summary that the paragraph gives. I'm not going to read it, but you might want to point that out or read it. I'm talking about before you get to understand the context. There's so much in this passage, and I never do spend much time on their understanding the context. When there's important context to bring out, I bring it out, but usually they do too much there. So I don't do anything in that. I wouldn't do anything with that part, except for the last paragraph that begins with the words chapter 4. It says, chapter 4 continues fleshing out the main theme of the letter. How do Christ followers live out their Christian faith in the midst of oppressive circumstances, which that is the theme of the book or the passage. And verse 1 is right away, we're faced with something here that I think the curriculum is giving you on the second part of the verse the wrong interpretation based on a wrong translation, because the CSV is not translating this a phrase in verse 1 properly. So it says, therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose. Now, Christ suffering in the flesh here goes to, obviously, to death. Because he who has suffered, I'm reading from the New American Standard Version, notice the past tense. Every other version, well, I haven't checked every version, but King James, ESV, NESV, the Greek, the word suffer there, suffer in the flesh, has ceased from sin. Both ceased and suffered are in the past tense. The CSV, as you look in your curriculum, translates it in the present tense. He that suffers in the flesh has ceased from sin. As if just normal suffering puts us in a status where we are dying to sin. Now, dying to sin is going to be the emphasis in the next verse, in the next couple verses. But the word in verse 1 in that second half is suffered, past tense, ceased. You've definitely ceased from sin. The idea is that just like Jesus died, he suffered and died, he who suffers and dies for Christ no longer has to battle with sin. Christ has given us the victory. And so he's trying to encourage these believers who are struggling because some of their loved ones have been martyred. Some of them will be martyred, probably. And his point is, hey, if you go all the way to that point, place in suffering, if you've suffered to that point like Jesus did, to death, your battle with sin is over. And with that thought in mind, you can be encouraged, verse 2, as you live the rest of the time in the flesh, as you are alive, no longer are you going to live for the lust of men, but for the will of God. So your ability to live for God is encouraged by the fact that death is going to be a positive thing for you. It's because Christ has given us the victory. So I think that's really important to bring out the proper tenses there and the proper interpretation. Basically, Jesus used this kind of language. Luke chapter 9, verse 23 and 24. He said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. But the image of taking up your cross was an image of death. And though he applies it to something you can do daily, it was a very real reality that following Christ could mean your actual death. And so that's kind of the connection of verse 1 and 2 that we're seeing here. Get to verse 3 and 4. The key here is that there's a drastic change in a person's life when they're truly dead to sin. In such a change that unbelievers will clearly see it and many will not like it. So, the believers in Peter's day, like some of you, were saved at later ages. Right? They weren't raised in Christianity from birth, basically, like some, like basically I was. So you're running with this crowd in verse 3. This was your past. Verse 3, the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles. So you've been running in this crowd, in this kind of life. You've been pursuing sensuality and lust and drunkenness. And then you get saved. And verse 4, in all this, they're surprised that you don't run with them anymore. You don't run with them into the same excess of dissipation. And they malign you. So suffering is caused in part by that you are, think about it. If you're constantly doing something that is sinful with a group of people, and all of a sudden, hey, I'm saved, I don't do that anymore, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to mock you. They're going to ridicule you. And some of you you've experienced that. And actually, the word malign is a very strong word. It's really a word for... it can be translated blasphemy. They blaspheme against you. And this is where the passage gets kind of complicated. So I want you to look at verse 4 and look at verse 5. And I'm looking at the New American Standard Version. I'm sure it doesn't matter what version you're looking at. You're going to see the word they. And all this they, okay, that they is pointing back to unbelievers. Verse 3. So in all this, they are surprised that you do not run with them into the same excess of dissipation, and they malign you, but they will give an account to him. So those two theys are talking about unbelievers. That part's pretty clear, right? They're going to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. But then verse 6 is where things get confusing. For the gospel has for this purpose been preached even to those who are dead. So now we have the term dead in verse 5, which is speaking of unbelievers. Unbelievers are, even when they're living, are often referred to as dead because they're dead in their trespasses and sins. But verse 6 is talking about a different group of people, which becomes obvious if you're not confused in the second part of the verse. Even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh as men, they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. Well, that is an expression that's describing believers. So basically, and the curriculum is teaching this, but they don't make it real clear. The way the leader guide is laid out, they like to just go to each verse and do a little bit of a phrase and start talking about it. And so when you start reading right where it says verse 6 and it starts talking about verse 6, you're going to immediately think that they're still talking about the same people that are being described in verse 4 and 5. And so it sounds like they're saying that verse 6 is still talking about believers. But when you read their explanation, you keep reading it, you realize they're saying the same thing that I'm going to say, that I'm going to tell you, and that is this, that in verse 6, they're talking about people who had been obviously unsaved, but this is the whole point of the gospel. The gospel is preached to those who are dead in the spiritual sense, that though they are judged in the flesh as men, they may live in the spirit according to the will of God because they get saved. I felt it would be clearer if I read this quote from one of my commentaries. The people to whom Peter refers here were dead, but when they were still alive, they had heard the joyful news of the gospel and had believed. So I've said that wrong. They're physically dead at this point, he's describing, but they're believers, the people of verse 6. So let me read the quote again. I'm probably confused you a lot. The people to whom Peter refers here were dead, but when they were still alive, they had heard the joyful news of the gospel and had believed. Their lives had been changed. Their transformed lives had activated the malicious dislike of unbelievers. The judging referred to here in verse 6 seems to have been done by wicked people who persecuted and martyred them, just like is described in verse 4, that they would be surprised and they would respond that way. Let me get back to the quote. The judging referred to here seems to have been done by wicked people who persecuted and martyred them. As a result, they were now dead. They faced the ultimate persecution. Yet that was not the end of it, because even now they live according to the Spirit. It's the same expression actually used in chapter 3, verse 18 of Jesus, where it says, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. So these people in verse 6 are dead physically, but they are believers. Who got saved at some point in time while they were being, and therefore then were persecuted for that and were killed. So basically, this whole passage, as we've been seeing throughout the epistles, emphasizing the need for us to have an eternal perspective on our lives, and obviously when we're suffering. 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18, so we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient or temporal, but the things that are unseen are eternal. I know it's getting longer here, but I want to finish a quick comment on two applications. Peter's going to apply our need to love one another and our service. Verse 8 is interesting. Love covers a multitude of sins, and I can't help but think that maybe Peter is thinking about the question he once asked Jesus in Matthew 18, verse 21 through 22, where Peter comes up to him and says, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times, or 70 times 7 times, emphasizing you always need to forgive. So here's Peter. He once asked the question of how often do I have to forgive him? Now he's telling us love covers a multitude of sins. So he obviously learned that lesson. Also, speaking about spiritual gifts, you probably won't have any time left in your lesson to really deal with this, but people often want to know, how can we know what our spiritual gifts are? I don't have time to go into a full-blown thing, but I want to give you 3 thoughts. Number 1, people need to be active in service. You can't know what your gifts are if you're not doing anything for God. So when you just serve, just say yes and serve. And as you do that, you'll discover where you fit and where your gifts are. Secondly, beware of what others are saying about your giftedness. Don't discount people when they say, hey, I think you have the gift of such and such. A lot of times people can see in us what we can't see or don't want to see in ourselves. Third, be submissive to what God is doing in your life, even if it seems to be outside your comfort zone. Like for me, as God began putting opportunities for me to preach in front of me, and it's like, no, that's not my gift. Well, I wouldn't know it was my gift until I started doing it. And so be submissive, be active, be listening to what others are saying. Hope all this helps, and I hope you have a great day.